Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the And Also podcast. I'm your host, Madison, and today's episode, we are going to be focusing on grief yet again, but this time it's a little bit different than the traditional grief from death or loss. We're actually going to be talking about grieving the childhood you never had / grieving childhood. And a lot of us were forced to grow up really fast due to whatever circumstances, or maybe we were parentified from a young age. And so we just didn't get to have the childhood that maybe we saw in movies or other people around us got to have. And so we're going to be exploring the grief around childhood. Before we get into that, let's do our drink of the day. You guys, liquid death is my new personality, core trait. It is my new hyperfixation. I am so obsessed. And then I saw that they came out with this limited edition fall seasonal flavor. It's called Psycho Cider. Not the biggest fan of that name, to be completely honest with you. But I will say the flavor is everything. So I am living for this. So I got my case of this at Walmart. I didn't see them selling these individually, so I did buy the full case. And I wish I got another case because now I haven't been able to find it ever since. I am literally living for this. I love liquid death in general. You will see liquid death a lot more on Drink of the Day. I am advocating for that sponsorship, hands down. Okay, it's gonna happen. I'm manifesting it. It's gonna happen. But this flavor specifically, I was like, no, I actually need that today. I actually need it right now. So let's get into it. Allegedly, it's a sparkling water that is apple cider flavored. Let's have a sip, shall we? You guys, this is so good. I can't even put it into words. I'm not a sparkling beverage person. I say that in almost every episode, and then I have a sparkling beverage. I just feel like a lot of guests, they enjoy a little bubbly drink. So I always try to do something that the guest is also gonna enjoy. And for me, it's never been a sparkling beverage or anything of the sort, but this, it tastes like apple crisp in a can. And I know that sounds weird and it doesn't really sound refreshing, but it's I don't know. It's cold and bright and seasonal and cozy, but it's still like water. I don't know how to explain it. For me, I like that it's not overly carbonated. It's not the type of carbonation that actually hurts. And because I have RCPD, which is a condition where I literally can't burp, my throat muscles do not allow me to burp. People think I'm making this up all the time. I promise I'm not. But because I have RCPD, drinking carbonated drinks is not a fun experience. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. So I need something that's very lightly carbonated, and I need to be able to drink it throughout the whole day. So that's why I like liquid death, because it's not too much. Anyways, I'm rambling so much. I really like this drink. If you can get your hands on this flavor, definitely do it. If you can't, try the mango chainsaw because it's so, so, so good. That's really it for drink of the day. I should also mention, yes, I dyed my hair black, and yes, I got bangs. I don't know. I was going through something. I saw Beetlejuice, and then I rewatched Beetlejuice, the original, 100 times, and here we are, black hair, bangs, the whole thing. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and let's bring on our guest, Abby. I'm so excited for you guys to meet her. Let's get into it. So I am here with Abby. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I would love for you to talk about why you're here today and just share a bit of your story. I did preface them and let them know, we're talking about grief of a childhood that you never got to have. Feel free to take the mic.
Yeah, well, so I grew up here in Saratoga-Schuylerville area. I'm the oldest of 4 and I have 3 younger brothers, and for the longest time I was in denial of the fact that I took care of them for all of my life, and to this day I still take care of them. And while that's not a bad thing to be taking care of your siblings, it was definitely something that took my childhood away from me because I was put in a position where I couldn't be a kid.
I mean, before we turned on the camera and before we started recording, you talked about your siblings and just kind of their unique experiences. Do you want to talk about that? And
yeah, I mean, so I've 3 little brothers. We're all a year apart, so we go Yeah, 22, 21, 20, and then 19 as of today.
Wow.
Yeah, so
It's a lot happening as of like yesterday and today.
I know, a lot's going on. And then my parents are actually in England right now too, because that's where my dad's from. So they go back and forth. So we're all really close in age. However, my one brother, he struggles with a lot of like autism, mental health type stuff. And then I have another brother who is a type 1 diabetic. And so growing up, you know, those things always took precedence over anything else that was going on with anybody else. Like, it was always, you know, what do they need, and not, you know, turning around and being like, is there something that...
I mean, I'm the middle sibling. I have an older sister.
Yeah.
And then I have my younger sibling. And I feel just my own family structure.
Yeah.
That I was always, in a way, treated as the oldest. Just because of my personality type and my tendency to sort of like take control of situations. Yeah. And I think so many people who are like middle or oldest sibling... It's just like almost an automatic thing for parents to cast responsibility onto the oldest child. And because I don't even know if their intent is necessarily bad, or if they just don't know better, or whatever it may be, but it happens a lot.
Yeah.
And especially having, you know, 2 kids in the family who do need extra help and extra attention, that sort of fell onto you.
Yeah.
Which, at least this is what it kind of sounds like you're saying.
Yeah.
And like, in what ways were you kind of expected to step up to the plate for them?
I mean, I was changing diapers as early as 3 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Like, because we were all so close in age, and my dad, like, growing up was away a lot because of his job and stuff. He did a lot of traveling when we were younger. Okay. It was like just my mom. There was me, and then it was the 3 boys. Again, I don't want to say any of it is like a bad thing, to be able to help out your parents, or to be able to do something where, like, you know, you, I don't know, aid in any way, but at the same time, like, it just really took away from my own experiences.
Right. Like, you felt like your childhood came second.
Yeah.
And the caretaking role came first. Like, that was, you were always expected to do that before you could, like, go have fun. So do you want to talk more about, if just for those of you who may not know what parentification is, that are listening, do you want to kind of talk about what that is, and kind of how it can impact a child in their adult life, and even in their childhood?
Yeah, like, parentification is where a child is, you know, put into this role of being a parent from a really young age, or not even a really young age, but in my experience, it was a very young age.
Yeah.
And they're given roles that typically children aren't supposed to be handling. I remember specifically, you know, I was watching my brothers alone at the age of like 8. And so if I was 8, it was 7, 6, and 5.
And you're not even old enough to be like taking care of a 7-year-old, let alone a 5-year-old, you know?
And like, we had babysitters too, but a lot of the time they were very overwhelmed by the situation. So a lot of them would leave, or they wouldn't show up, and then it would just be me. My mom was in school or working, and then my dad was working, and he works like 12 hours a day. My mom works, I think, like 8. Parentification is just basically, you know, unfortunately, being put in the role of becoming a parent from a really, really young age. And, you know, that entails like the cooking, the cleaning, you know, any sort of housework, the childcare, like, and also being a parent to your own parents too, and helping them with stuff that they can't deal with.
Yeah, like being emotional support, physical support, being a laborer, being a chef, a maid, when really you're like 10 and you're just trying to get your homework done. You know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't have to have that level of worry. And I think, like, when that is put onto us at a young age, I don't know, it forces our brain to see the world very differently. Like, you can no longer kind of let go and have fun because you have this sense of like there's always something that needs to be taken care of or done, and that can be so daunting because you're I don't know, you're like almost permanently in this fight or flight state of like, what can I do? How can I like be overly productive now as an adult, because you're used to being turned on.
the amount of anxiety that is like ingrained in me because of it, and the amount of anxiety even when I was a child, like I was always so nervous, like I was always catastrophizing, I was always like trying to think of the worst possible thing that could happen and how I was going to deal with it.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, when you're 8 years old watching 3 kids,
like the house is going to get set on fire.
Yeah, like you have to be prepared for things that a normal 8-year-old doesn't even know actually happen in the real world.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's very interesting because a lot of people might say, oh, this probably prepared you so well for life, and it's the reason you're so organized and responsible and on top of things.
No.
I'm like, I would rather be the most like chaotic, unorganized, unaware person than have to have thrown away my entire childhood for this.
And to be honest, I think it's made me less of an organized person, more of a chaotic person, because now that, you know, I'm grown up and I don't have this responsibility of watching my little brothers anymore, I find myself like not knowing what to do.
Oh, interesting.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Like, and it makes me anxious. And so I hyperfixate on other things. Like the other day I was really anxious about the fact that the leaves weren't changing fast enough for my liking. And I was like, wait, like, why is this like an issue?
Yeah, it almost
sounds
like
mean?
A little bit of a form of like OCD and like wanting that control and like trying to find ways to put yourself back in the driver's seat. And
you know, my brothers, because we're all like close in age too, like they're moved out or, you know, off doing their own thing, and that's kind of stressful because I can't protect them anymore, and that had always been my job.
Same. Oh my God, that like gave me chills because like I feel that so much. And I don't know if you experienced this. Were you the first one to move out of your house?
So yes, I went away to college. I didn't like move out, but I chose the farthest college out in Rochester. That really rocked the boat and started the whole like everybody finding their own thing and wanting to move out and everything. And that didn't go over well with.
Did you feel guilt like when you moved out? A lot of guilt, because that's how I felt when I moved out. I was like leaving Sid here. It feels wrong because I'm so attached.
Yeah, it was definitely a mix. Like it was bittersweet because part of me was like, thank God, like I can go and do my own thing. But then that also led to kind of a downfall in a way because I realized just how depressed and upset and like just how much I was struggling, and then not to have something to focus on like made it worse. I mean, there was school, but at that point I was
different. Like, it's different because that's for you.
Exactly.
Too. And you've never been able to do anything for you because you grew up constantly worrying about everybody else and caring for everybody else.
Yeah.
So when it comes to giving yourself the time, it's like well, shit.
What do I do with myself? That's crazy.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say, I felt so guilty, you know, so like my brother would call me. Like I was always the first point of contact for like if something bad was happening, like at school or at home, if somebody needed to be picked up or a ride needed to be arranged, like it was me that was contacted before like my parents were typically. And so, you know, I felt really guilty because my brothers would call me and they'd be looking for advice, they'd be looking for help or, you know, whatever. And I was so far away, and you know, I felt terrible leaving them at home with my family and stuff just because, you know, it was always a little bit rocky and everybody butt heads because we lived in a smaller house and, you know, there were 6 of us, so there wasn't a ton of room. I don't know. I just always I feel really guilty. I still feel really guilty because 2 of them still live in the house, but they're kind of like getting ready to move out now. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a relatable feeling. I think as an older sibling in general, like feeling guilt, and then especially for people in this sort of situation where you almost have to accept that you can't be that point of contact anymore.
Yeah.
And so how has that been, like, transitioning out of that? Like, have you been able to set boundaries with your family in that way, or has that been a challenge? Are you still kind of like trying to figure out what that looks like?
I am still actively working on that.
Yeah.
Again, it's great to be able to help your family. It's great to be able to be there for everybody. But
disclaimer, we're not saying like, no, I know. Screw your family.
And I'll say it over and over again because I still, and maybe that's part of like the trauma too, is feeling guilty, even just saying
recognizing
anything.
It might be wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I get reached out to by my family all the time. Like my mom, you know, the other day she tore her meniscus, it's like an ongoing thing. Oh. And like, you know, instead of my dad or my brothers that live with her, you know, taking her to urgent care or to the emergency room, she called me when I was at work and she was like, hey, can you come and get me? And, you know, I work an hour away. And so I drove from my work. Mm-hmm. And I realize now I probably should have said, hey, this isn't like, I love you.
But it's
and I want to
so
be there
hard.
for you.
Like, I don't blame you. I mean, I even think about it in regards to, like, you know, there's always that one friend who, like, needs to break up with their partner, and then they say they're going to do it, and then they're like, and then they don't do it.
Yeah.
It's very much like that, because it's not that you don't love the person. It's not that you don't care about the person. Yeah. And it's also that your desires and your needs and your wants in life have always been put second. So you're like programmed to put your own feelings aside and say, sorry, I'm just gonna do what this person needs me to do, because that's what I know, and that's what's comfortable and safe in a way.
That's been such a struggle for me, and I'm currently working on it with my therapist to say, like, hey, you know, I can't keep doing, like, I have my own apartment that I need to be, you know, tidying up on the weekends. I can't be running back and forth helping everybody.
Yeah, and just, you have a life.
I know. I could, like, do something with it, right?
Like, you can hang out with people. You can, you know, hang out with yourself. You can do things for yourself. But that stuff is really hard.
It really is.
When you've been raised in a way that, like, does not acknowledge that you are your own individual person. You're not part of a unit.
I remember growing up, it was like, if we weren't doing something productive, the world was going to end. Or at least for me. I can't speak for my brothers. I'd be sitting, I love to read, but, like, reading or playing with my Barbie dolls, or, you know, hanging out, just, like, doing my own thing in my bedroom. You know, my mom would come in and she'd be like, hey, go Windex the mirrors, or go Windex the windows, like, make sure that things are tidy. And I'm like, well, why? Like, it's the weekend. Nobody's doing anything. Like, nobody's coming over. Like, why do we need to be having this crazy, like, deep clean session? Or it was,
why are you recruiting your children?
No, exactly. Or it was like, so-and-so is all by himself over there. Like, why don't you go play with him? And I'm like, well, maybe I didn't want to play with him. Maybe I just wanted to hang out. Yeah. Maybe I just wanted to hang out by myself for a little while.
Yeah.
But so it was a lot of that. And so now trying to find that boundary of, like, what's okay and what's not okay to say no to when it comes to your family. It's so hard.
It's really hard. And of course, like, when it's from such a young age, it's just, it becomes so habitual.
Yeah.
Truly, you could spend the rest of your life in that cycle.
No.
Like, if you don't actively try to get out, and if you don't actively do the hard thing. Yeah. Over and over and over again until it doesn't feel like the hard thing.
It makes me just sick to my stomach thinking about it. You know what I mean? Because it's like just so ingrained.
One of the main questions I have for you is just in terms of grief, because I think grief is a really vast thing. And I think, you know, as you saw, you were at the live podcast recording, and we talked about other forms of grief that are not just, oh, somebody died and I'm grieving. There is so many types of grief, and this is more of like an ambiguous grief sort of thing of, like, you're grieving this idea of a childhood that you just never got to experience. So how does that feel for you, and what does that look like?
With this grief, I am definitely trying to feed into the childhood I didn't get to have. I hit the age of, like, 10, and it was like, oh, you don't really, like, you shouldn't really be playing with these anymore.
You're 2 digits now. Yeah, you can, like, move on.
Get rid of them. Right. And, you know, if I see something, like, in Target that I think is really cute, and it's, like, a Monster High doll, like, I was obsessed with the Monster High dolls. Like, I'm recollecting them, and I feel kind of silly doing that because I'm a 23, well, almost 23-year-old, but I feel kind of silly collecting them. But then I kind of look at it and it brings me joy and it makes me happy, and it kind of heals that little part of me. And I'm like, if that's what gets me through it, then let's do it that way.
Yeah, literally, who cares? There's worse things you could be doing.
Yeah, right?
I love that, though. It's like almost reconnecting with those parts that you never got to fully experience. I was actually thinking about this yesterday because this will go up a little bit later, but yesterday was Halloween. Yeah. And I was, like, driving to the store to get, like, groceries, like adult stuff. Yeah. And I saw all these, like, little kids in their costumes, like, running around with their parents, and it, like, made me feel so triggered and, like sick and sad and disgusted. And I was like, oh my God, like, I'm never gonna have that again. Yeah. And it makes you feel like, I don't know, this, like, deep existential like doom of like, wow, that's really over, and like we're never going back there. And that's a really like hard, and I think everyone deals with grief of their childhood, but I think with this particular situation, it's like, but you didn't get all of that. Like maybe you got glimpses of it here and there, but you didn't get the full experience. And so now you're just left with like, what could it have been like if I wasn't forced into this role at a young age? Yeah. So it's like grieving the what if of it versus grieving like what actually was there.
Yeah. And that's something I struggle with all the time. Like my wife and I,
they got married yesterday.
Literally
okay.
So weird. My girlfriend Zoe and I, we've been together for 6 years, and she looked at me last weekend. She was like, let's get married. And I was like, okay. And
I guess so.
That's what we did yesterday. No, that's something like my wife and I, we talk about a lot, especially when I'm like, you know, going through depressions and stuff and spurts of like, you know, having really bad mental health days. We'll talk about some of the stuff that I'm really grieving that I didn't get to have like in my childhood. Yeah. She'll even bring up something from her childhood and I'm like, you got to do that? Like, that's crazy.
Like, I thought that was only in the movie.
Yeah, no, exactly. It was like, I'm so happy for you, but now I'm also kind of like, I get kind of sad. I feel like jealous.
And jealous. It's so like almost disturbing that you're like, I don't want to be mad at you. Yeah. But like, I deserved that too.
And that's something like I'm struggling so hard with right now. And it's something that I'm working with my therapist. Like if we go out, let's say like with my girlfriend, my wife's
I'm like,
parents.
Let's correct that.
We need to get it ingrained.
Your in-laws.
I know. That's
oh my
weird
God,
too.
You have in-laws. Mm-hmm. You literally have in-laws.
No, I have a sister-in-law now. I've never had a sister.
That is literally crazy.
I'm so excited.
That's so wild.
Like even just seeing them interact like on a day-to-day basis, like, you know, they always like give each other hugs. They'll sit next to each other on the couch and watch a movie, or they'll sit down and like watch TV together. And that was never something like that we did. Just seeing like them interact on a day-to-day basis, it makes me grieve what I could have had and still to this day don't have. Yeah. And it's not something that you can even have a conversation with your parents about, because it's like, that's just how they are.
It didn't happen that way. I don't remember it happening like that. Yeah. I'm like, but it did.
And it's devastating because you'll never get that acknowledgement from them either.
No, and you know what? The sad reality is that even if you did, would it really change anything?
No, because what's done is done, unfortunately. Exactly. I think a little part of me, it would make me feel validated, because I'm very much the type of person that loves, like, I like when somebody looks at me. Yeah. So I think a little part of me, like, it would heal that, but at the same time, like, all of that trauma, all of that, like, upset and grief and emotional distress, like,
it's still there.
It's not going to go away.
Right. I think the tough thing with this sort of grief is kind of accepting that it's just there and it's gonna be there. And it is like little things, like giving yourself the opportunity to buy the Monster High dolls, to like put them on your shelf, to, you know, paint your room bright pink, or like rewatch childhood shows, like bringing yourself back to that and like reconnecting with that, and also like forgiving yourself. Yeah. Because I think a lot of times it's always like, oh, you need to forgive those people for what they did. Like, I don't believe in that at all. I don't think everybody deserves forgiveness, and I don't think forgiveness fixes anything. It's more or less like allowing yourself to forgive yourself, and not to be like angry with yourself that life went this way, or you know, maybe I should have like set boundaries sooner, or maybe I should, but like, you didn't know.
We were the children, you know what I mean? Like,
we shouldn't have known.
Exactly.
You can't know. It really changes your adult relationship with your family, because I think like our parents, now they see us as the adults that they always saw us as. Yeah. And that's weird too, because now they're treating you like a regular adult, but to you, they're treating you the same as they did when you were a kid.
My parents definitely see me as like a friend now, which I find very weird, because I still want my mom. I still want my like mom to be my mom. I still want my dad to be my dad. But it's turned into this weird relationship, which I'm glad I have it. Yeah. But it's like, oh, we're all so close. We're all like happy. We're friends, whatever. But that doesn't take away from the fact that everything that happened when I was younger, like,
it happened. Yeah. It literally happened.
And it's devastating. But it's also like, it's nice to have that relationship, because I know people are a lot less fortunate and don't get to have relationships like that with their parents. But it doesn't take away from the the grief or the sadness.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. And while we're talking about this, I'm curious. I don't know how, like, I don't know if this is too personal or whatever, but your stance on, like, having kids one day, like, is that, has it impacted your decisions in that regard?
I go back and forth because it kind of feels like I already, like, had kids in a way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I've done this already. Like, I don't want to do it again. I don't want to have to be responsible for another little life. I mean, aside from maybe, like, my cat, my dog. But, you know, that's a little less intense.
It's so different.
Sometimes. I don't know. Part of me, my wife and I, we go back and forth all the time. I'm like, we could have a baby. Like, that would be so cute. We could adopt. Like, you know, it would be so nice. We would have a beautiful little family and we would raise them how we both always wanted to be raised. That breaks my heart. It makes me want to have a kid. But then I think about it and I'm like,
you actually start thinking about, like,
I'm like, I don't want to mess them up. I don't want to have that responsibility again. And I
you don't want your kid to be sitting here feeling how you're feeling now. And it's so scary. It's like when you think of the big picture, it's like, oh, that's cutesy and fun.
Yeah.
But then like, when you think about
Halloween, you know, I want to have a kid to walk around with.
Yeah. Then you think of the day to day and like the decisions and the stress and the responsibility and you're like, actually, no thank you.
The decisions and the responsibility and the stress doesn't scare me as much because that's something like I've always had to do. Like,
like you'll pick up on it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's the thought of messing a child up. Like,
deep trauma.
I don't want them to have the same experience I did. I'm afraid like I'll be like my parents and they'll have to take care of themselves. And that's terrifying to me. And that's not fair. I go back and forth. I haven't made a formal decision yet, I guess.
That's fair. I mean, you don't have to.
No.
You don't have to. It can be back and forth, you know?
Yeah.
How are you coping with the anger, the sadness, the grief?
Yeah.
How does it impact your current relationships in or outside of your family?
I'm working on it. It's something that I actively every single day am working on.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. And while it is great, it's, you know, it is just so much work. I don't really have anything I can't like think of what I actively try to do aside from just like refocus myself, like recenter myself, like acknowledge the feelings, understand that they're there and they're valid, which is really difficult because, you know, sometimes I just feel like a big green jealous monster.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it manifests as jealousy towards others and other people's relationships and stuff like that.
And that's a hard thing to admit to. You know what I mean? It's like, it's really big of you just to be able to say, like, I'm jealous.
Yeah.
Like, this sucks. And, like, also being able to, like, sit in the fact that it sucks really bad. And it's not fair.
And it's something that I've just slowly had to come to terms with. Like, there were stretches of weeks where I would just cry over it, like, all the time. It was, you know, really, really difficult. But I've just gotten to the point where I'm more comfortable with it. And I'm like, well, this is how it is. There's nothing I can do to change that. Yeah. And I just have to keep moving forward, acknowledge the feelings, you know, understand that they're valid. And I feel like jealousy is something that people, like, they make out to be like this awful, awful thing. And it's okay to be jealous. It's okay to have those feelings because it's human.
It's a matter of, like, what you do with those feelings.
Exactly.
It's not the feeling itself. And this is something I talk about all the time because it's, like, this idea from a very young age that we have to, like, you know, we're striving to be happy and life has to be happy and joyful and great.
Yeah.
And then the second you feel anything that's not that, it's like, full of shame. It's full of, like, don't feel that. You shouldn't feel that.
Yeah, you have no right to feel that because your life is great otherwise. It's like, that's not how that works.
It's not how that works at all. And I think if we could just, like, take a second and make room for every feeling that we have and not have the goal at the end to always be to be happy. Yeah. That is not the goal for everybody.
Just okay is totally valid. And, you know, to be sad, you're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to be depressed. You just obviously don't want it to go on too long. But, like, you need to feel your feelings. It's the whole human experience is feeling the entire array of feelings.
Exactly. And even when you think of, like, happiness and all the great feelings, like, if you're happy 24/7, it most likely means you're, like, running from something, like, from something that's on the other end of that. Like, there is no universal emotion that should be felt all the time. Feeling jealous is normal, especially when it comes to like loss, grief, resentment, like all of these things are, there has to be space for all of it.
Yeah.
Do you have like a little picture of childhood you? Like, you should like keep one just like on your desk or like somewhere that you see a lot, just to look at and be like, that's my girl.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna take care of her now because I have the control and the power now.
That's such a good idea. That's so sweet.
Yeah. Back to the topic of the ambiguous grief versus like grief of a death. Do you think it's harder to grieve something that didn't happen versus something that did happen? Or like, how do you almost process that in your mind of like, I'm not even grieving something that actually existed or happened?
Growing up, I really, really struggled with reading and math. Like, I really struggled to learn. But in comparison to my other brothers, it wasn't ever addressed. Abby's fine.
She'll figure it out.
Yeah, Abby will take care of it. And my sophomore year of college, I started seeking therapy because I was in a really, really dark place. I was really, really unwell. My therapist looked at me one day and they were like, yeah, you have like ADHD and like learning disabilities. And I like deadpanned. I was like,
like me?
What?
A little old me?
What are we talking about here? And he was like, well, you don't know that? And I was like,
would have been nice.
No, it would have been really nice to know that. And so he ended up writing me a referral to go see like a specialist. And I was diagnosed with like all these different things. And turns out I wasn't just dumb. Turns out, you know, I wasn't just the spacey, talkative girl, you know what I mean, that didn't care about school. Because I did. I cared so deeply, but I could never get where I wanted.
Yeah, because, well, little sidebar, but the system is not built for us.
I very much grieve the education that I could have had. I very much grieve the, you know, what could have happened if I was like taken care of. If somebody looked at me and was like, this little girl is struggling. My parents didn't do it. They knew. Yeah. My teachers knew, but they just kind of brushed it off. They were like, oh, you know, she's just spacey. I just have to acknowledge, again, it's the same type of deal. Like, just acknowledging, you know, what could have been. Just acknowledge, you know, it might take me some time to learn something.
We have such similar, like, this is so weird because I feel like I'm talking to myself right now.
Oh, really? That's
literally
so funny.
Like to a T, literally same thing. So like, you know that you're autistic and you have like severe ADHD, right?
I hate when they do that to me. I'm like, can we
actually,
pump
no,
the
girl.
brakes? Pump the brakes.
You think I would have said something if I knew that already?
Yeah, exactly.
So I get testing. They're like, oh yeah, how did you not know this until now? I'm like, maybe it's because no adult in my life has ever advocated for that. And then you feel, after that diagnosis, it's like, oh, it's like great to know, but also you feel so sad for yourself.
No.
And you feel like so, like you don't even know who you are now.
Exactly.
You're like, okay, now I'm like in this situation. Yep. What do I do?
I'll never forget so before I went and got like proper testing done, there were like all these different online, like not quizzes, like BuzzFeed quizzes, but it was like actual, like, this isn't a medical diagnosis, but this is like the criteria.
Like straight from the DSM-5.
Yes,
like.
exactly. And so I remember I went through and I did like all these different tests and everything was coming back like, you're fucked, like, you know?
You're done. Like, throwing the towel now.
And I remember I looked at it all and I then did it again. And
like, let me just double
I was
check.
Like, I'm just going to continue.
Like, what if I tweak that one answer to like think about it in a different way? Like reframe. Oh my God. Yeah. Like literally
I was, like,
same.
Freaking. But then I sat there afterwards and I just started to sob. I was like, it wasn't me, you know, like it was like how, but I'm not it's that's dumb.
Different now.
I'm not the one that's stupid. Like,
yep.
I just needed a little bit of extra help.
Exactly. And then that's a whole other thing. I feel like just the grief of like never getting that support and like never being seen in that way. And oftentimes probably getting in trouble for being that way.
I never got help like doing homework growing up. Like if I did, it would turn into like a total screaming match with my mom. Like it was
doing math at the
God,
table.
Yes. And you're like, or like reading, you know, we would have the reading things where they bring home a book.
The reading logs.
And I
minute math.
Oh my God, not the minute math. That made me sweat.
That should be
illegal.
Banned. Illegal. Shouldn't, like,
So
we're
bad.
banning books. No, we need to be banning minute fucking math.
It was awful. I
Evil.
still don't know my times tables. I won't lie to you.
I can't even count without my fingers. Like,
No,
I can't do it.
I'm the same way. I have dyslexia and ADHD. I apparently have dyscalculia too. So, but I think it just plays into the dyslexia because my numbers, like, I switch them all the time and they flip, like, on me. I don't know. It's weird. Either way, it was very much something that I to this day still mourn the loss of what I could have been and what I could have done if given the proper tools. And that's a scary thought too. Like, it should have happened.
Right.
And it didn't. And I don't know why, but that makes me feel like so icky, so nervous. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. But, and it's like, I think it's that, like, spiraling thought of, like, no matter how much I think this through, I can't go back and fix it. Do you ever feel like you have to parent yourself as an adult now since you didn't get that parental guidance and support?
Yes.
As a child.
There are little things that I'll realize I was never taught, like, by my parents. I just, like, taught myself, or, like, I don't know, just, like, all the time there are little things that I will all of a sudden realize, like, my parents never showed me this. I just kind of figured it out on my own.
Yeah, so many things.
Like, even just, like, I didn't know, like, what a period was until I got it. Like, it was never something that was spoken about. It was never something that was, like, explained to me. And I just kind of figured it out.
You never, even after you got it, you never, like, talked to your mom about it? Or
I did, but it was, like, a conversation that was shut down very quickly. And it was kind of like, okay, well, you have to be very quiet about it. Like, your brothers can't know. Nobody in the house is supposed to know that you have it. Probably from, I would say, like, end of 5th grade through my junior year of high school, my mom and I, like, barely spoke. Like, it was minimal to no speaking. Like, and if we did, it was screaming.
And you were still doing caretaking.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost at that point, no one even needed to tell you what to do. You just knew.
I just did it.
It's like you were trained.
Mm-hmm. And at that point, I was very quickly reaching burnout, too. Wow. So it was like...
To be 16 really and difficult. Burnt out.
Yeah.
Like,
I was so exhausted at 16. It was crazy. But one thing that I always look back on is growing up, I never thought I would live past the age of, like, 10. Or, like, when my brothers didn't need me anymore, I was like, there's no reason for me to be here. Like, I'll just be gone at that point. I'll disappear. I don't know. Like, I was the older sister. I was, my brother's older sister. And that was it.
So I saw this post the other day. It was like, my daughter will never have to watch a YouTube video, talking about, like, how to shave. Yeah. Or my daughter will never have to, like, use YouTube as a resource of how to do her makeup or like how to style her hair. And it is little things like that are, like, really sacred moments between like, especially, like, a daughter and their mom. Like,
my parents were really, really busy, and I think that played into a huge, like, part of everything. I mean, obviously it did. But, like, I remember, when I was going through puberty, and there was, like, the shaving situations that, like, came up. And I remember I was, like, crying, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, nobody ever showed me how to shave or anything. And I had, like, a freak out because I was like, what am I supposed to do? How do I even do this?
How does this work?
And I remember I got yelled at because I was tweaking. I was, like, losing my mind.
Because a kid who, like, needs help and is, like, doesn't know how to react other than to overreact is a troublemaker and a,
Yep. I chronically overreacted. And to this day, I still, like, my parents, my brothers, they'll be like, oh, like, you're being
so dramatic.
So dramatic. And I'm like, am I being dramatic, or am I having, like, a normal reaction to a situation?
That's
like,
what I'm saying.
That's all. Like,
to be confused is, like, normal, and to, like, not know what to do with that, especially when you weren't taught how to self-regulate. You weren't taught how to work through emotions. You were just taught to shut them down. Surprise, they come up. They're not going to stay down.
I know, they don't really go away. It's kind of part of the human experience or something.
Right. Who would have thought?
Allegedly. No idea. No, I freaked out, and then my mom came home, like, a day later and, like, tossed an electric razor at me, and she was like, you can use that. And, like, that was the end of the conversation.
Oh my God.
I didn't know that, like, you should use, like, shaving cream or soap or anything, like, like shaving oil. That's my preferred now.
I love a shaving oil. The Tree Hut shaving oil.
Yes,
they're so good.
So good. But like until my wife came into the picture and she like saw the way I was doing some things, she was like, why? She's like, you don't use a shaving cream or a shaving oil? I was like, what's that? Like, what do you mean?
Wow.
Yeah. Stuff like that. Just like random stuff.
Yeah. But it's really big stuff when you think about it. Like,
yeah.
Stuff that you feel like your younger self just deserved and never got.
Yeah. So my mom, she has 3 brothers, and she still is very much that like motherly role. She's actually the second to youngest.
Oh,
so I think regardless of where I hit in the lineup, I think I still would have been parentified and made into that like parental figure because I am the only girl. Dang.
So gender role. It's so exhausting.
I think it's something
boring.
All women unfortunately have to deal with.
Yep. 1,000,000%. So I guess we should talk about where do we go from here? What do we do from here? How do we deal with this as adults? And I guess in a way, like you've talked about that personally, but I know there's probably a lot of people listening or watching who have been in your shoes.
Yeah.
Or are currently in your shoes. Yeah. And like what would you say?
To everybody.
Yeah,
who's ever had to deal or is currently dealing with any of this type of crap, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's so much. So
it really is. I think the best thing that anybody can do in these types of situations is just acknowledge your feelings and realize they're valid.
Yeah.
And I feel like that goes for any struggle that you're having. Like, your feelings are valid and you are allowed to feel them. It's part of the human experience. It's part of like, just living your life. Like,
yeah. And that doesn't mean just acknowledge the comfortable feelings.
No,
it means
the uncomfy.
Like acknowledge especially the uncomfortable ones.
The jealousy, the anger, the regret, like the self-hatred too.
Yeah.
Like, one thing that I think is shoved down our throats is this like body positivity, this like, oh, love yourself, love yourself, love yourself. It's okay to just be okay with yourself.
Right.
To go from like hating yourself to, just going to loving yourself. Like
it's not overnight work.
And so I think, the biggest thing is just accepting that you have these quote unquote ugly feelings and, realizing that they're going to be there and you're allowed to have them. I know that writing stuff down and like journaling really helps me. And just word vomit onto a page, like everything that you're thinking and feeling. And even if it's awful, like you can burn it later if you want. If you're
right. Like
so
no one
afraid.
ever has to see it.
No, it's something that's yours.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to keep it and do as you please with it.
I think it's all about community too. And finding people who relate, finding people who you can share this stuff with and not feel judged or not feel like you're doing something wrong. I mean, it sounds like your relationship with your wife has been really supportive and has shown you like so much of the things that you didn't get to have. And you've gotten to build that relationship with her that like you never got to build with anybody in your family growing up. And that's like really amazing. And it's not going to fix it or change it, but these are all things that like really help us choose our own family when we're adults and try to build just a better structure around ourselves that we just never got. So
no, I feel like that's so important, and that's something I'm trying to build more of a community around me. I really struggle with making friends and stuff like that, and so that's an active thing I'm trying to work on, and I think it's so good for people to
relate to other people and share experiences. And like, it's so good.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this. I know it's really vulnerable and like probably hard to just like talk about the depths of like your trauma and the way that your brain works, but I'm really grateful that you did this today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm trying to get myself out of my comfort zone, and I'm trying to get myself like talking about stuff that makes me uncomfortable, because I feel like everybody deserves to tell their story, even if it's not a comfy one.
Yeah,
so
it's not always fun.
No,
ever really.
Living can be kind of hard, but we're doing
living
it.
Sucks. Being a person is hard, but here we are.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so if you guys watched episode 3 of season 2 with Shay, I mentioned that I was going to be going through her program, her 8-week program, where we are working through some really deep-rooted childhood trauma and grief. And I wanted to give you an update. I'm going to be doing these updates every week for the next 8 weeks. At the end of the episode, if you want to skip forward, you can. I just really wanted to keep you guys in the loop and updated on how I'm working through my grief experience and getting through some of these really difficult times. In week 1, we mostly just kind of set the tone for what we wanted to work through, our expectations, and Shay got a really deep background on me and who I am and what I have been dealing with and going through. So what's really cool that I was so hesitant about after this first session, or I guess before the first session, was that she starts every session off with a deep breathing meditation exercise, just a few minutes. And something I realized immediately was how much I don't actually ever take deep breaths because I am in fight or flight. I'm stressed out. I'm elevated all the time. My brain is operating from a place of survival mode, and that's really exhausting. And I know a lot of that stems from grief. And, I also know that on my podcast here, like, everyone knows my story generally. But that being said, I don't share that much about myself in depth. I share a lot of other people's stories, and I share glimpses of mine kind of mixed in with that. And so ideally, this end segment here is going to give you guys a much clearer picture of what it is that I'm actually dealing with in my everyday life. And the things that I'm dealing with are things that have motivated me to start this podcast. So this is really vulnerable for me to get into, like, what I'm talking about in my sessions with her. Because it's intense. It's really intense. So yeah, week 1 was setting the baseline, doing the meditation. I was nearly moved to tears in the meditation simply because I don't talk about my stuff a lot. I love hearing other people's stories. I love sharing other people's stories. So when it comes to mine, I ignore it as much as I can, and I've been running from it. We also explored some of the key players in my life, people that really impact my day to day. Obviously, Regis is one of those because the grief I deal with and the trauma I deal with around his death is just so intense and so ever present in my life. And, in this first session, we talked about 2 of my 4 key players, and I didn't bring up Regis. And I feel so hesitant to bring him up in so many scenarios. I honestly try to avoid it, low-key, because I almost, am so in denial still to this day that this is the reality of life and that he is dead and he is not here. And that has been so hard. So in talking to Shay, I told her that it's going to be really difficult for me to bring it up, and she needs to push me there. She really does. And so that's kind of something we're going to be working on in the next few sessions. It's just getting me to really open up about the depths of the grief and where these unsettled feelings are coming from. What is really cool is we use a platform called Telegram, and we actually can chat with each other on there throughout the week. So if I'm dealing with something comes up, if I need advice or I need help with a practice, I can actually reach out to her, which is super cool. Some of our practices for week 1 were for me to unplug from work at a decent time. So because I am dealing with so much trauma and grief, my coping mechanism is to literally run as far as I can from it and do anything and everything to keep my life so extra busy that I don't have time to sit down and sit with myself. So something I struggle with is working, because I work from home and I'm self-employed. I work late into the night, if I'm not at the funeral home. I'm working on a project for a client. I'm doing a shoot. I'm recording a podcast episode. I'm always, always, always doing something. I wanted to make it a point to unplug earlier and then have, at 5 or 6 o'clock, the rest of the night is for me, to focus on me, to work through my stuff, to meditate, to do yoga, to go to the gym, to cook a really nice dinner, doing more things for me. I also have been trying to start the morning with meditation and breath work because I don't give myself any time, even if it is 3 to 5 minutes, to just calm down and just set my intention. I've always been very anti-meditation because it quote unquote never worked for me. But the thing is, I haven't really tried it. I just thought oh, meditation. No, what the truth was is that I was scared to meditate because I was scared of the feelings that were inevitably going to come up in meditation. So I've been doing that, and it has been bringing me a lot of clarity and a lot of time to sit with some things that are super hard. And then I just wanted to end my day with some reflection, kind of talking about how did I feel? How can I support these emotions? How am I proud of myself? That was week 1. And then Shay texted me multiple times throughout the week asking how I'm doing and if I had the ability to carve out 5 minutes for myself. So that was the focus of week 1. It was hard. I'm not gonna lie. It's hard to look at these things as what they are and face them and work through them. It's not something that comes easily to me. I'm a runner. I'm a track star. I am a runner. I will sprint as fast as I can away from this sort of stuff. So kind of being guided to sit and look at it in the face and work through it has been life-changing. Anyways, that's my mental health update. Working with Shay, of course, if you are interested in doing some of this sort of work, her information will be linked in the show notes. You can connect with her. But yeah, so next week I will let you know if anything changes, how I'm doing, what we're working through, and we will do this for the next 8 weeks at the end of each episode. All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode, whether you're watching on YouTube or streaming on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Definitely be sure to head on over to Instagram and give us a follow. I'm trying to hit 1,000 followers on there, so we're really close. Please, please, please follow. That would mean the world to me so that we can continue to share these wonderful stories. If you are tuning into this episode on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and leave a comment below letting me know what you would like to see in upcoming episodes. And if you are streaming on audio platforms, be sure to save this episode, send it to a friend, and rate the show 5 stars. All right, you guys, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Thank you for all the love on season 2 so far. And huge thanks to Abby for coming in today and sharing so much vulnerable yet really helpful information with me and, of course, with you guys. I love you all so much. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week for another episode. Bye.